The gunshot that echoed through the crowded saloon silenced even the drunkest patrons, all eyes turning to the man in the black hat, who stood at the entrance with a smoking pistol aimed at the ceiling. Cassidy Montgomery felt her heart sink as his cold gaze settled on her, knowing that her time of hiding had come to an abrupt end. "Ladies and gentlemen," the bounty hunter announced with a cruel smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I believe I've found something of value that some of you might be interested in purchasing." Cedar Creek, Colorado Territory, 1876, was supposed to be just another stop on Cassidy's journey west, a place to rest before continuing her escape from a past that seemed determined to follow her. The small mining town nestled in the shadow of the Rocky Mountains had appeared safe enough when she'd arrived 3 weeks ago, taking a position as a waitress at the Silver Dollar Saloon. But safety, she was learning, was never more than an illusion for a woman alone. "This pretty little thing," the bounty hunter continued, gesturing toward Cassidy with his free hand, "is a runaway. And tomorrow at noon, I'll be holding an auction right here in this establishment to sell her services to the highest bidder." Whispers erupted throughout the room as Cassidy stood frozen behind the bar, her serving tray clutched against her chest like a shield. She wasn't property to be sold. She was a free woman who had fled an arranged marriage to a cruel man 3 times her age. But in this moment, with the bounty hunter's gun trained in her general direction, there seemed little she could do to assert that freedom. "That ain't legal," called out a voice from the corner of the room. Cassidy's eyes darted to the source, a tall man leaning against the far wall. His face was partially obscured by the brim of a worn leather hat, but she could make out a strong jawline shadowed with stubble. Unlike the other patrons who wore either mining clothes or business attire, he was dressed in the practical garb of a working cowboy: faded denim, a cotton shirt open at the collar, and a leather vest that had seen better days. The bounty hunter's smile only widened as he turned toward the voice. "Well now, friend, I've got papers here saying otherwise." He patted his breast pocket. "This woman broke a contract, and I'm simply facilitating the collection of the debt." "Show me those papers," the cowboy demanded, straightening up from the wall. For the first time, Cassidy got a clear look at him as he stepped into the light. He was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with intense blue eyes that stood out against his sun-bronzed skin. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to danger, his hand resting casually near the holster at his hip. "Name's Kieran Blackwood," he announced, addressing not just the bounty hunter but the entire room. "And I don't take kindly to men who treat women like cattle." The bounty hunter's expression hardened. "This ain't your concern, cowboy, unless you're planning to bid tomorrow." "I reckon it became my concern when you walked in waving that pistol around," Kieran replied, his voice level but carrying a steel edge that made several patrons shift uncomfortably in their seats. Cassidy watched the exchange with a mixture of hope and fear. No one had stood up for her since she'd fled her home in Boston 6 months ago. At every turn, she'd found that her status as a woman alone made her vulnerable to those who would take advantage. This stranger's intervention was unexpected, and while gratitude swelled within her, experience had taught her not to trust easily. The bounty hunter, who had introduced himself as Silas Harker when he'd first entered the saloon, seemed to reassess the situation. His gaze swept the room, noting how the atmosphere had changed. What had begun as a simple announcement had transformed into something more volatile, with several of the miners now muttering among themselves about the legality of what was being proposed. "The auction will proceed as planned," Harker declared, lowering his gun but keeping it visible in his hand. "Noon tomorrow. Any man with money is welcome to attend." His eyes locked with Kieran's. Even you, Cowboy, if you've got the means." He then turned to the saloon owner, a portly man named Gerald who had been watching the proceedings with visible discomfort. "I'll be needing a secure room to keep my merchandise overnight. I assume you have accommodations." Gerald hesitated, his eyes flicking toward Cassidy. She had been a good worker during her short time at the Silver Dollar, never causing trouble and always arriving early for her shifts. But he was a businessman first, and crossing a man like Harker wasn't good business. "Third floor, end of the hall," Gerald finally said, not meeting Cassidy's betrayed gaze. "It locks from the outside." Harker nodded in satisfaction. "Much obliged." He turned back to Cassidy. "Let's go, girl. Your serving days are over." Cassidy's mind raced through her options. She could run, but Harker's gun would likely find her before she reached the door. She could scream, but who would help her? The cowboy seemed willing, but one man against an armed bounty hunter were poor odds, and she didn't want blood on her hands. With no viable alternative, she slowly placed her serving tray on the bar and stepped around it, her legs feeling like lead. As she walked toward Harker, she caught Kieran's eye. There was something in his gaze, not pity, but determination that kindled a small flame of hope within her. "This isn't right," Kieran said as Harker grabbed Cassidy's arm. "And it won't stand." Harker laughed. "Big words from a saddled tramp. What are you going to do about it?" Kieran's voice remained steady. "Whatever I have to." Cassidy was led up the stairs, Harker's grip painful on her arm. Behind her, she could hear the saloon erupting into animated discussion, the normal evening revelry replaced by debate over what they had just witnessed. As she reached the landing, she glanced back down to see Kieran still watching her, his expression unreadable but his intent clear. He was planning something. The room on the third floor was little more than a closet with a small bed and a washstand. A single window, too small for anything but a child to climb through, offered a view of the alley behind the saloon. Harker shoved her inside, his breath hot against her neck as he leaned in close. "Don't get any ideas about escaping," he warned. "I've tracked you across 3 territories, and I always collect my bounty." "I'm not property," Cassidy said, finding her voice at last. "Whatever papers you have are fraudulent. I was never legally bound to marry Mr. Hollister." Harker shrugged. "That's between you and the buyer. All I care about is the $500 Hollister promised me for returning you." "He's 70 years old," Cassidy spat, "and cruel." "I won't go back." "You don't have a choice," Harker replied. "But if it makes you feel any better, I doubt Hollister will be the highest bidder tomorrow. There are plenty of men in these parts who'd pay good money for a pretty, educated Eastern girl like you." His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "Especially one with your attributes." With that, he backed out of the room, closing the door behind him. Cassidy heard the key turn in the lock, followed by Harker's retreating footsteps. Only when she was certain he was gone did she allow herself to sink onto the bed, tears of frustration and fear finally breaking free. She had come so far, endured so much, only to end up here about to be sold to the highest bidder in a frontier town where the law seemed to hold little sway. Her thoughts turned to the cowboy, Kieran Blackwood. His intervention had been unexpected, but what could one man do against established practice? In her experience, good intentions rarely prevailed against greed and power. Still, as she wiped away her tears and began to examine the room for possible means of escape, she couldn't help but remember the determination in Kieran's eyes. Perhaps, in this remote corner of the Colorado Territory, she had finally found someone willing to fight for what was right. Down in the saloon, Kieran Blackwood was deep in conversation with the bartender, his voice low to avoid being overheard by the few remaining patrons. "Tell me about the girl," he urged. How long has she been here? The bartender, a former Union soldier named Tom who had lost an arm at Gettysburg, glanced around before answering. About 3 weeks. Showed up on the stage from Denver, asked for work. Keeps to herself mostly, but she's a hard worker. Polite too, not like some of the girls who pass through. And what do you know about that bounty hunter? Tom's expression darkened. Silas Harker. Has a reputation for finding people who don't want to be found. Doesn't much care about the how or why, just the money. He leaned closer. Word is he's done some killing that wasn't strictly in self-defense, if you catch my meaning. Kieran nodded grimly. And this auction, is that something that happens around here? Not in Cedar Creek, Tom replied firmly. We're rough, but we ain't slavers. Whatever paper he's got, it don't make what he's doing right. This confirmed what Kieran had suspected. Harker was operating in a legal gray area, counting on the frontier town's distance from formal law enforcement to carry out his scheme. The nearest federal marshal was in Denver, at least 2 days' ride away too far to intervene before tomorrow's noon auction. I need to speak with her, Kieran said. Tonight. Tom shook his head. Harker's got the only key to that room, and he's staying right next door to her. Plus, he's hired 2 local toughs to stand guard at the bottom of the stairs. He studied Kieran with newfound interest. What's your stake in this, anyway? You know the girl? No, Kieran admitted, but I know injustice when I see it. The bartender seemed satisfied with this answer. After a moment's consideration, he reached beneath the bar and produced a folded piece of paper and a pencil. Write her a note. I'll see that Molly delivers it with the evening meal. Harker ordered food sent up for both of them. Kieran took the paper gratefully, quickly scribbling a message. He folded it and handed it back to Tom along with a silver dollar. For your trouble. Tom pocketed the coin with a nod. Be careful, Blackwood. Harker ain't the type to back down from a fight. Neither am I, Kieran replied, finishing his whiskey in a single swallow before heading for the door. I'll be back before first light. As he stepped out into the cool night air, Kieran's mind was already turning over plans. He had ridden into Cedar Creek merely looking for a few days' work before continuing south to his brother's ranch in New Mexico. He hadn't been seeking trouble or adventure, and certainly not a confrontation with a dangerous bounty hunter over a woman he'd never even spoken to. Yet something about the situation, and about Cassidy herself, had struck a chord deep within him. Perhaps it was the quiet dignity with which she had faced Harker, or the flash of defiance in her green eyes even as she was being led away. Whatever the reason, Kieran found himself unable to simply ride on and leave her to her fate. With determined strides, he made his way to the livery stable where his horse was boarded. There was much to do before morning, and time was not on his side. In her locked room, Cassidy had exhausted every possibility for escape. The window was indeed too small, the door too solid, and even the floorboards refused to yield when she tried to pry them up with a hairpin. She was contemplating the washstand, wondering if she could break off a leg to use as a weapon when a soft knock came at the door. Who is it? She called cautiously. Molly from downstairs, miss. I've brought your supper. Cassidy approached the door. I'm not hungry. Please, miss, came the urgent whisper. I've got something else for you too, from the Cowboy. This caught Cassidy's attention. She heard the key turn in the lock, and the door opened to reveal a young woman perhaps a few years younger than herself, carrying a tray of food. Molly glanced nervously down the hall before entering quickly and closing the door behind her. I can only stay a moment, she said, setting down the tray. Mr. Harker is downstairs playing cards, but he'll be back soon. From her apron pocket, she withdrew a folded piece of paper. The Cowboy asked me to give you this. Cassidy took the note with trembling fingers, unfolding it to read the message written in a strong, clear hand. Miss Montgomery, I will help you escape tonight. Be ready at 2 a.m. When you hear 3 taps on your door, move to the window. Do not lose hope. KB. She read it twice more, scarcely daring to believe the words. Who is he? She asked Molly. This Kieran Blackwood, Molly shrugged. Came through town about a week ago. Keeps to himself mostly, but he's done some breaking work for the Henderson spread outside town. They say he's good with horses. She lowered her voice. Some of the men say he fought in the war and later rode with a group hunting outlaws in the Texas territory, but he don't talk about it. This information did little to assuage Cassidy's concerns. For all she knew, this cowboy could have designs of his own. Yet what choice did she have? Between Harker's auction and a chance at freedom, the decision was clear. Tell him I'll be ready, she said, quickly burning the note in the small oil lamp and scattering the ashes. Molly nodded, then hesitated at the door. They're saying awful things downstairs about what'll happen tomorrow. You seem like a decent sort. Whatever brought you here, I hope you get away. With that, she slipped out, locking the door behind her. Cassidy was left alone again, but now with something she had been lacking before: a plan, and more importantly, hope. The hours crawled by with excruciating slowness. Cassidy ate a little of the food Molly had brought, knowing she would need her strength. She changed from her serving dress into the more practical traveling clothes she had been wearing when Harker found her: a simple blouse and skirt that would allow for easier movement. Around midnight, she heard Harker return to his room next door, the floorboards creaking under his heavy tread. She lay on the bed fully dressed, watching the small clock on the washstand tick toward 2 o'clock. When it was finally time, she rose silently and gathered the few possessions she had: a small purse containing her meager savings, a locket with her mother's portrait, and a well-worn book of poetry that had been her companion through many lonely nights. At precisely 2 o'clock, 3 soft taps sounded on her door. Following the instructions in the note, Cassidy moved to the window and peered out into the darkness. At first, she could see nothing in the alley below. Then, a figure emerged from the shadows: Kieran, leading 2 saddled horses. He looked up, spotting her at the window, and placed a finger to his lips in a gesture for silence. Then he disappeared from view. Moments later, she heard the softest scraping at her door, followed by a metallic clicking. The lock turned and the door swung open to reveal Kieran, a set of lockpicks in his hand. "Can you ride?" he whispered without preamble. Cassidy nodded. "Yes." "Good, we need to move quickly and quietly. Harker has men watching the front of the building, but they're not expecting anyone to leave from the back." He glanced at her simple traveling clothes with approval. "Follow me, and stay close." Kieran led her down the servants' staircase at the rear of the building, freezing at every creak of the old wooden steps. They encountered no one. Kieran had earlier slipped the night porter a generous bribe to be elsewhere during this precise window of time. When they reached the back door that opened into the alley, Kieran paused, drawing a revolver from his holster. "Once we're outside, we move fast. Mount up and follow my lead. If anything happens to me, the horse knows the way to the Henderson Ranch about 5 miles east of town. Ask for Martha, she'll help you." Cassidy was struck by the careful planning he had put into this rescue. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "You don't even know me." In the dim light, she saw something flicker across his face, a complex emotion she couldn't quite name. "Let's just say I've seen what happens when good people stand by and do nothing," he replied. "I'm tired of being one of them." Before she could respond, he eased the door open and gestured for her to follow. The alley was dark, the only illumination coming from a sliver of moon partially obscured by clouds. The horses stood exactly where Kieran had left them, reins loosely tied to a hitching post. Cassidy approached the smaller of the 2 animals, a dappled mare who regarded her with intelligent eyes. With practiced ease that spoke of a childhood spent riding on her father's estate outside Boston, she mounted without assistance. Kieran swung into his own saddle, a tall sorrel gelding that stood at least 16 hands high. "Stay close," he murmured, "and follow my lead." They moved at a walk until they reached the end of the alley. Then Kieran turned the horses not toward the main street, but along a narrow path that ran behind the buildings. Cassidy realized he was deliberately avoiding the town center, taking a circuitous route that would bring them out beyond the edge of Cedar Creek without passing any of the likely watch points. They had almost reached the eastern edge of town when a shout rang out behind them. "There, that's her." Kieran cursed under his breath. "They've spotted us. Hold on tight." He spurred his horse into a gallop, and Cassidy did the same, leaning low over the mare's neck as they thundered along the dirt path. Behind them, she could hear the pounding of hooves as their pursuers gave chase. "The bridge." Kieran called over his shoulder. "We need to make it across." Ahead, Cassidy could see a narrow wooden bridge spanning a deep creek bed. On the other side lay open country and a better chance of losing their pursuers in the darkness. A shot rang out, the bullet whistling past her ear close enough that she felt the air disturbed by its passage. Instinctively, she crouched lower, urging her horse to greater speed. They hit the bridge at a full gallop, the wooden planks thundering under their horses' hooves. Halfway across, Kieran suddenly reined in his mount and dismounted in one fluid motion. "Keep going," he shouted to Cassidy. "I'll catch up." Though every instinct screamed at her to continue, Cassidy pulled her horse to a stop at the far end of the bridge. Turning, she watched in disbelief as Kieran drew his revolver with one hand while pulling something from his saddlebag with the other. The pursuers, she could now see there were 3 of them, were almost at the bridge when Kieran fired twice into the air. The shots startled their horses, causing momentary confusion. In that instant, he struck a match and touched it to whatever he held in his hand. There was a brief flare of light, and then he tossed the object onto the bridge before running toward Cassidy. "Move!" he yelled, leaping back into his saddle. They galloped away from the bridge just as a deafening explosion ripped through the night. Cassidy risked a glance back to see the center section of the bridge collapse into the creek bed below, leaving a gap too wide for horses to jump. On the far side, their pursuers had pulled up short, one man still struggling to control his panicked mount. "What was that?" she gasped as they continued to ride, putting distance between themselves and the town. "Blasting powder," Kieran replied. "I stopped by the mining supply store earlier this evening. Thought it might come in handy." The casual way he said it, as if destroying bridges was something he did every day, almost made Cassidy laugh, despite the gravity of their situation. "You're either very prepared or very crazy, Mr. Blackwood." She saw the flash of his smile in the darkness. "Most days, it's a bit of both, Miss Montgomery." They rode for another hour, following game trails and shallow creek beds to obscure their tracks. Eventually, they came to a small clearing sheltered by a stand of pines. A thin tendril of smoke rose from a carefully banked fire. "We'll rest here until first light," Kieran said, dismounting and helping Cassidy down from her horse. "Harker won't be able to cross that creek for miles in either direction, especially in the dark. By dawn, we'll have a good head start." He led her to the fire, where a coffee pot sat warming on the edge of the coals. Beside it was a small pack containing provisions, jerky, hardtack, and a canteen of water. He had prepared for their flight with remarkable thoroughness. "You had this all planned," Cassidy observed as he poured her a cup of the strong black coffee. "The escape route, the supplies, even the blasting powder. How did you manage all this in just a few hours?" Kieran handed her the tin cup. I've learned that in this life it pays to be thorough. And I had helped the bartender, Tom, pointed me to the back staircase. The livery boy got the horses ready. Even Molly did her part, keeping Harker occupied while I picked the lock. But why? Cassidy persisted. Why would they all risk helping a stranger? Kieran's expression turned serious. Because what Harker was planning wasn't just illegal, it was wrong. Most folks, when pushed, will stand up for what's right if someone shows them how. He paused, studying her in the firelight. Now, maybe it's time you told me your story. Who are you running from, and why is Harker so determined to catch you? Cassidy warmed her hands on the coffee cup, debating how much to reveal. Trust didn't come easily after months on the run, but Kieran had risked his life to help her. He deserved the truth. My name really is Cassidy Montgomery, she began. I'm from Boston originally. My father was a shipping merchant who made a fortune during the war, then lost it all in bad investments afterward. She took a sip of coffee before continuing. When he died last year, he left my mother and me with nothing but debts. Mother passed away from consumption 3 months later. Kieran listened silently, his blue eyes intent on her face. Our neighbor, Edwin Hollister, offered a solution. He would pay off all our debts and provide for me if I would agree to marry him. Her voice hardened. He's 70 years old, Mr. Blackwood, and has buried 3 wives already, all young, all dead within a few years of marriage. So you ran, Kieran said, understanding dawning in his eyes. Cassidy nodded. I took what little money I had and headed west. I thought if I could get far enough away, start a new life, he would eventually give up. She laughed bitterly. I underestimated his pride. When I refused him, I humiliated him in front of Boston society. He hired Harker to bring me back, dead or alive. And the auction, a convenience, I imagine. If Harker can't return me to Hollister, he'll at least recoup his expenses by selling me to someone else. She shuddered. The papers he mentioned are probably forged, or perhaps a twisted interpretation of the betrothal agreement I signed under duress. Kieran tossed another small branch onto the fire, his expression thoughtful. Where were you headed before Harker caught up with you? California, Cassidy replied. I have a distant cousin in San Francisco who owns a bookshop. She wrote once, years ago, offering me a position if I ever wanted to come west. She looked down at her hands. I don't even know if she's still there or if the offer still stands, but it was the only plan I had. Kieran nodded slowly. San Francisco is still a long way from here. Harker won't give up easily. Men like him can't afford to develop a reputation for failure. He studied her across the fire. You'll need help getting there. I couldn't ask you to. You're not asking, he interrupted. I'm offering. I know these territories, the safe routes and the dangerous ones. I can get you to California. Cassidy was speechless for a moment, overwhelmed by this continued kindness from a stranger. Why would you do that? You've already risked enough. Kieran's gaze dropped to the fire, watching the flames dance among the coals. Let's just say I understand what it's like to be hunted, to have your choices taken away. When he looked back up, his eyes held a resolve that brooked no argument. Besides, I was heading southwest anyway. California's just a bit farther than I planned. There was more to his story. Cassidy could sense it in the careful way he chose his words, in the shadows that crossed his face when he spoke of being hunted. But she didn't press. Everyone in the West seemed to be running from something or someone. That was part of its appeal and its danger. Thank you, she said simply. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Stay alive, he replied with equal simplicity. That'll be payment enough. They fell into a companionable silence, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the occasional shifting of the horses as they grazed nearby. Despite the danger of their situation, or perhaps because of it, Cassidy felt more at peace than she had in months. For the first time since fleeing Boston, she wasn't alone. Dawn found them already riding, having broken camp before first light. Kieran set a steady pace, alternating between trot and walk to cover ground without exhausting the horses. He kept them off the main trails, following instead the less obvious routes that wound through the foothills of the Rockies. "We'll head south first," he explained as they rode. "Let Harker think we're making for New Mexico territory. Once we're sure we've lost him, we'll turn west toward Utah, then Nevada, and finally California." Cassidy nodded, impressed by his knowledge of the terrain. "You seem to know these lands well." "I've spent most of my life out here," Kieran replied. "After the war, I couldn't settle back east. Too many ghosts." He glanced at her. "What about you? How does a Boston society girl know how to ride like you do?" Cassidy smiled at the memory. "My father believed women should be accomplished in more than just needlepoint and piano. He taught me to ride almost before I could walk." Mother was scandalized, but father insisted it built character. "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Cassidy agreed, a note of sadness entering her voice. "Until the gambling took hold of him. After that, he changed." Kieran nodded in understanding. "I've seen it happen. The war changed a lot of men that way, sent them looking for the same rush of danger they felt in battle." "Were you in the war?" Cassidy asked, curious about this man who had so unexpectedly become her protector. "Union cavalry," he confirmed. "Enlisted at 18, fought until Appomattox." His tone made it clear he preferred not to elaborate, and Cassidy respected his reticence. They rode through the morning, stopping briefly around noon to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. Kieran studied the horizon with a practiced eye, watching for any sign of pursuit. "So far, so good," he said as they prepared to mount up again. "But we should keep moving. There's a place about 3 hours' ride from here where we can spend the night, an old trapper's cabin I've used before. It's well hidden and defensible, if it comes to that." The remainder of the day passed without incident, though Cassidy found herself constantly glancing behind them, half expecting to see Harker and his men appear over every rise. By late afternoon, fatigue had set in, her muscles aching from the unaccustomed hours in the saddle. Kieran noticed her discomfort. "Not much farther," he assured her. "Just over that ridge ahead." As promised, they crested the hill to find a small valley nestled between pine-covered slopes. A creek ran through its center, and near the water stood a sturdy log cabin, weathered by years of exposure but still sound. "It's not exactly the Palmer House Hotel," Kieran said with a hint of apology as they approached, "but it's dry and the roof doesn't leak." "It looks perfect," Cassidy replied honestly. After the tension of the past 24 hours, any safe haven was welcome. The interior of the cabin was rustic but clean, with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table with 2 chairs, and a narrow bed built into one wall. Shelves held basic provisions, canned goods, coffee, and other necessities sealed in tins to protect them from rodents. "The old trapper who built this place died about 5 years back," Kieran explained as he lit a fire in the hearth. "A few of us who travel through this area keep it stocked. Unwritten code of the West: leave the place better than you found it." While Kieran tended to the horses, Cassidy took stock of their supplies and began preparing a simple stew from the canned goods and dried meat. By the time he returned, the cabin was filled with the savory aroma of cooking food. "Smells like heaven," he said appreciatively, hanging his hat on a peg by the door. Cassidy smiled, stirring the pot hanging over the fire. "It's the least I can do. You've risked so much to help me." They ate in companionable silence, both too hungry and tired for much conversation. After the meal, Kieran insisted Cassidy take the bed while he made a pallet for himself near the fire. We should reach the territorial border in 2 days, he said as he spread his bedroll on the floor. Once we're in New Mexico, we'll have more options for throwing Harker off our trail. Cassidy sat on the edge of the bed, brushing out her long auburn hair with a tortoiseshell comb she had carried from Boston. Do you really think he'll follow us that far? $500 is a lot of money, Kieran replied. And men like Harker don't give up easily. Their reputation depends on bringing in their quarry. He stoked the fire, sending sparks up the chimney. But don't worry. I know every hiding place and water hole between here and the Pacific. If anyone can get you to San Francisco safely, it's me. There was no boasting in his tone, just a quiet confidence that Cassidy found reassuring. As she lay down on the narrow bed, pulling the rough wool blanket up to her chin, she realized that for the first time in months, she felt truly safe. "Good night, Mr. Blackwood," she said softly. "And thank you again." "Kieran," he corrected with a small smile. "I think we're well past formalities, don't you?" "Kieran," she agreed. "Then you must call me Cassidy." "Good night, Cassidy," he said, his voice gentle in the firelit darkness. "Sleep well." Despite her exhaustion, sleep was slow to come. Cassidy lay awake, listening to the crackle of the fire and Kieran's steady breathing. Her thoughts turned to the strange twist of fate that had brought him into her life just when she needed him most. There was something about him, a quiet strength, an unspoken pain that resonated with her own experiences. In the short time she had known him, she had come to trust him completely, a realization that was both comforting and frightening. She finally drifted off, her dreams a confused jumble of running horses, exploding bridges, and a pair of intense blue eyes that seemed to see straight to her soul. Morning brought with it a steady rain that drummed on the cabin's roof and turned the ground outside to mud. Kieran stood at the window, frowning at the weather. "We should wait it out," he decided. "The horses could use the rest, and traveling in this will only slow us down and leave a clearer trail." Cassidy nodded, secretly relieved. The previous day's ride had left her sorer than she cared to admit. "What if Harker is still following us?" "This rain works in our favor," Kieran assured her. "It'll wash away any tracks we left yesterday, and Harker will be facing the same difficult conditions if he tries to move in this weather." They settled into a quiet routine, making the most of their unexpected day of rest. Kieran repaired a loose board in one of the shutters, while Cassidy took inventory of their supplies, organizing what they would take when they departed, and what they would leave for the next traveler. As the day wore on, the enforced proximity allowed them to learn more about each other. Cassidy discovered that Kieran had grown up on a small farm in Pennsylvania, the middle son of a blacksmith. After the war, he had drifted west, working as a scout, a ranch hand, and occasionally as a bounty hunter himself, though only for those he believed truly deserved capturing. "I was good at tracking," he explained as they sat by the fire, the rain still falling steadily outside. "Too good, maybe. Found myself bringing in men who'd done little wrong beyond being on the wrong side of someone with money and influence." His expression darkened. "After a while, I couldn't stomach it anymore." "Is that why you helped me?" Cassidy asked. "Because you saw the other side of the coin?" Kieran considered this, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "Partly," he admitted, "but it was more than that. When I saw Harker treating you like property to be sold." He trailed off, his jaw tightening at the memory. "No one deserves that. Especially not someone whose only crime was refusing to be sold into marriage in the first place." The simple righteousness of his indignation touched Cassidy deeply. "There aren't many men who would see it that way," she said softly. "There should be more," he replied, meeting her eyes across the table. In that moment, Something shifted between them, a recognition of shared values that went beyond their current circumstances. Cassidy found herself wondering what might have happened if they had met under different conditions. In a world where she wasn't running for her freedom, and he wasn't risking his life to help her. The rain continued through the afternoon and into the evening, forcing them to spend another night in the cabin. This time, despite Kieran's protests, Cassidy insisted he take the bed. "You've been sleeping on the ground for days while tracking me," she argued. "And you need your rest more than I do. If Harker catches up to us, you'll need to be alert." Reluctantly, Kieran agreed, though he made a show of checking that her pallet by the fire was as comfortable as possible. The small gesture of consideration was not lost on Cassidy, who was becoming increasingly aware of the kind of man her rescuer truly was. They set out at first light the next morning, the rain having given way to clear skies and cooler temperatures. The storm had indeed washed away their tracks, and the freshly dampened earth made for quiet traveling. Kieran set a more aggressive pace, hoping to make up for the day lost to weather. By mid-afternoon, they had crossed into New Mexico territory, marked only by a weathered wooden sign that had seen better days. Kieran's mood visibly lightened once they passed this milestone. "My brother's ranch is about 3 days' ride from here," he told Cassidy as they watered the horses at a small stream. "We can rest there, get fresh supplies, maybe even proper beds for a night or two." Cassidy hadn't realized how tense she had been until she felt the relief of this news wash over her. "That sounds wonderful," she admitted, "though I don't want to impose on your family." Kieran laughed, a warm sound that she realized she hadn't heard before. "Connor would never forgive me if I passed through the territory without stopping, and his wife, Sarah, will be thrilled to have another woman to talk to. The nearest neighbor is 20 miles away." The prospect of female companionship after weeks of solitary travel was indeed appealing. Cassidy smiled, imagining hot baths, clean clothes, and conversation that didn't revolve around survival. They made camp that night in a sheltered hollow, once again taking turns keeping watch. Cassidy insisted on taking the first shift, arguing that Kieran had done the majority of the hard work and deserved rest. To her surprise, he didn't argue, simply showing her how to watch for specific signs of approach and what to listen for in the darkness. As he settled into his bedroll, Kieran looked up at her, his expression serious in the firelight. "Cassidy, there's something I need to tell you." Her heart skipped a beat at his tone. "What is it?" He hesitated, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I haven't been entirely forthcoming about my situation. The reason I was in Cedar Creek, I was lying low." Cassidy waited, sensing there was more to come. "About 6 months ago, I was working as a guide for a group of Eastern investors looking at mining claims. We were ambushed by a gang led by a man named Reese Dalton." His voice hardened. "They killed the investors and left me for dead. When I recovered, I went after them." "You hunted them down," Cassidy said, understanding dawning. Kieran nodded grimly. "I tracked them to a town in Colorado. There was a confrontation. Dalton and 2 of his men didn't survive it." He met her eyes steadily. "The law cleared me it was self-defense, but Dalton's brother, Victor, swore revenge. He's been on my trail ever since." "So you're being hunted too," Cassidy said softly. "Yes. That's why I understand what you're going through." He ran a hand through his dark hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "I should have told you earlier. If you're traveling with me, you should know the risks." Cassidy considered this new information. "Does this Victor Dalton know about your brother's ranch? Would he look for you there? Connor's place isn't under my name, and it's remote enough that few people know of our connection. But yes, it's a possibility." Kieran's expression was troubled. "If you'd rather not take that risk, I understand. I can get you to Santa Fe instead, help you find a stage heading west." The offer was thoughtful, but Cassidy didn't hesitate in her response. "No, I trust your judgment. If you think your brother's ranch is our best option, then that's where we'll go." Relief flickered across Kieran's face. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For not seeing me differently. Many would, knowing what I've done." Cassidy smiled gently. "We all have pasts, Kieran. What matters is who we choose to be now." She gestured to the darkness around them. "Get some sleep. I'll wake you if anything moves out there." He nodded, settling back down. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened, exhaustion claiming him. Cassidy watched over him, struck by how vulnerable he looked in sleep. The hard lines of his face softened. The man who had seemed so intimidating in the saloon just days ago now seemed much more human, complex, flawed, but fundamentally good. As she kept her vigil through the quiet hours, Cassidy realized that her feelings for Kieran were evolving into something deeper than gratitude. There was an understanding between them, a connection forged through shared danger and revealed truths. Whether it could ever be more than that remained to be seen. But for now, it was enough to know that neither of them faced their demons alone. The next 2 days passed uneventfully as they traveled deeper into New Mexico territory. The landscape changed subtly, the dense pine forests giving way to more open country with mesas rising in the distance. Kieran pointed out landmarks and shared stories of his previous journeys through the area, painting a picture of the West that was both harsher and more beautiful than Cassidy had imagined. Late on the 3rd day after crossing the territorial line, they crested a ridge to see a sprawling ranch nestled in a valley below. A large log house stood at its center, surrounded by corrals, barns, and outbuildings. Cattle grazed on the surrounding grasslands, and a creek wound through the property, its banks lined with cottonwoods. "Blackwood Ranch," Kieran announced with evident pride. "Connor built most of it himself when he came out here after the war. Started with nothing but a land grant and determination." Cassidy could see why he was proud. Even from a distance, the ranch spoke of prosperity earned through hard work. "It's beautiful," she said sincerely. They rode down the slope toward the main house. Before they had covered half the distance, a rider emerged from one of the outbuildings, spurring his horse toward them. As he drew closer, Cassidy could see the family resemblance, the same tall build and dark hair, though the newcomer's face was more open, less marked by experience. "Kieran." The man called, his voice carrying across the distance. "About time you showed your face around here." The brothers embraced warmly when they met, slapping each other on the back with the easy affection of men who had grown up together. Connor Blackwood then turned curious eyes to Cassidy. "And who might this lovely lady be?" he asked, tipping his hat politely. Kieran performed the introductions. "Connor, this is Miss Cassidy Montgomery. Cassidy, my older brother, Connor Blackwood." "It's a pleasure to meet you, Mr. Blackwood," Cassidy said, extending her hand. Connor took it with a warm smile. "The pleasure is all mine, Miss Montgomery. Any friend of my brother's is welcome at Blackwood Ranch." He glanced between them with undisguised curiosity. "Though I have to say, Kieran's never brought a lady friend home before." "It's not like that," Kieran said quickly, though Cassidy noticed a flush creeping up his neck. "Miss Montgomery is in some trouble. I'm helping her get to California." Connor's expression grew more serious. "Trouble, is it? Well, you can tell us all about it over supper." "Sarah will be beside herself with excitement. We don't get many visitors out here, especially not Eastern ladies." He led them toward the main house, keeping up a steady stream of conversation about the ranch, the weather, and local news. Cassidy found herself warming to him immediately. He had all of Kieran's straightforwardness, but with an added measure of charm and humor. The main house was even more impressive up close, 2 stories of solid log construction, with a wide porch running along the front. As they approached, a woman emerged from the door, wiping her hands on an apron. She was petite with honey blonde hair pulled back in a practical bun, and a face that lit up with pleasure at the sight of Kieran. "Look what the wind blew in," she called, hurrying down the steps to embrace him. "We were beginning to think you'd forgotten the way to New Mexico." "Never that, Sarah," Kieran replied, returning her hug with obvious affection. "Just had some business to attend to up north." Sarah turned her attention to Cassidy, her bright blue eyes taking in every detail of the travel-worn young woman before her. "And you've brought a friend. I'm Sarah Blackwood, Connor's wife and the long-suffering sister-in-law of this vagabond." Her warm welcome immediately put Cassidy at ease. "Cassidy Montgomery, I hope we're not imposing." "Imposing? Heavens no. It'll be wonderful to have another woman around, even if just for a few days." She linked her arm through Cassidy's, leading her toward the house. "You must be exhausted from the journey. I'll show you to a room where you can rest and freshen up before supper." As they entered the house, Cassidy glanced back to see the brothers deep in conversation, Kieran's expression serious as he spoke in low tones. She suspected he was explaining their situation, and felt a pang of guilt for bringing potential danger to this peaceful home. Sarah showed her to a comfortable bedroom on the second floor, with a real bed, washstand, and even a small bookshelf filled with well-worn volumes. "The washroom is down the hall," Sarah explained. "I'll have hot water brought up for you. There are clean clothes in the chest. They might be a bit large, but they'll do until we can wash what you're wearing." Cassidy was overwhelmed by the kindness. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." Sarah waved away her thanks. "Anyone Kieran brings home is family as far as we're concerned." She hesitated, then added more gently. "He told Connor a little about your situation in his letters. I want you to know you're safe here for as long as you need to stay." This revelation surprised Cassidy. "He wrote to you about me, but we only met a few days ago." Sarah looked confused for a moment, then understanding dawned. "Oh, no, I meant, well, I suppose I should let Kieran explain." She patted Cassidy's hand. "Rest now, supper will be ready in about an hour." Left alone, Cassidy sank onto the bed, her mind racing. What had Sarah meant? What explanation did Kieran owe her? The mysteries surrounding her rescuer seemed to multiply by the hour. After washing away the dust of travel and changing into a simple but clean dress from the chest, Cassidy felt refreshed enough to venture downstairs. She found the family gathered in a spacious kitchen filled with delicious aromas. Sarah was placing a roast on the table, while Connor poured wine into glasses. Kieran stood by the window, freshly washed and changed himself, his dark hair still damp. He turned as she entered, and something in his expression made her heart beat faster. There was a warmth in his eyes that hadn't been there before, or perhaps she was only now allowing herself to notice it. "Feeling better?" he asked, crossing to pull out a chair for her. "Much," she replied. "I'd almost forgotten what it feels like to be clean." Dinner was a relaxed affair, with Connor telling amusing stories about ranch life and Sarah asking thoughtful questions about Cassidy's journey west. The topic of Harker and the danger he represented was tactfully avoided, though Cassidy suspected the brothers had discussed it thoroughly. After the meal, Connor brought out a bottle of good whiskey, pouring small measures for everyone, including Cassidy. "To new friends," he toasted, raising his glass. "And to safe journeys," Sarah added with a meaningful glance at Kieran. As the evening wore on, Connor regaled them with tales of the brothers' childhood in Pennsylvania, much to Kieran's apparent embarrassment. Cassidy found herself laughing more than she had in months, the tension of the past days temporarily forgotten in the warmth of family hospitality. Eventually, Sarah stood and began clearing the table. "Connor, why don't you help me with the dishes? I'm sure Kieran and Miss Montgomery would enjoy some air after being cooped up inside." The suggestion was transparent, but Cassidy appreciated the tact behind it. Kieran caught her eye with a wry smile. "My sister-in-law, the matchmaker," he murmured as he stood. "Would you like to see the ranch? The view from the North Ridge is something special at sunset." Outside, the evening air was cool and fragrant with sage. They walked in companionable silence away from the house, following a well-worn path that led up a gentle slope. As they climbed, Cassidy gathered her courage to ask the question that had been nagging at her since her conversation with Sarah. "Kieran, what did Sarah mean when she said you had written about me? We only met a few days ago in Cedar Creek." He stopped walking, turning to face her with an expression that combined guilt and resolution. "I wasn't entirely truthful about how I came to be in Cedar Creek," he admitted. "It wasn't by chance." Cassidy waited, a knot forming in her stomach. "About a month ago, I was in Denver when I overheard Harker talking in a saloon. He was bragging about the job he'd taken tracking down a Boston society girl who'd fled an arranged marriage." Kieran's eyes held hers steadily. "He mentioned your name and Hollister's, said he'd traced you to Colorado and was closing in." "You knew who I was in the saloon," Cassidy said, realization dawning, "before Harker ever announced his intentions." Kieran nodded. "I followed him to Cedar Creek. I'd seen what men like Hollister do to young women they consider property. I couldn't stand by and let it happen, not if I could prevent it." "So you planned the rescue before you ever saw me," Cassidy said slowly, trying to process this revelation. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I was going to, but then." He gestured helplessly. "Things happened so quickly, and I wasn't sure you'd trust a stranger who admitted to following you, even with good intentions." Cassidy considered this, finding she couldn't argue with his logic. Would she have trusted him if he'd approached her with this story before Harker's arrival? Probably not. "I understand why you kept it from me," she said finally, "but I'm not sure how I feel about being watched without my knowledge." "That's fair," Kieran acknowledged. "For what it's worth, I only observed from a distance, enough to know when Harker arrived and to plan the escape route. I never invaded your privacy." They resumed walking, the silence between them now charged with unspoken thoughts. As they reached the ridge, the view opened up before them the ranch buildings below, bathed in the golden light of sunset, with mountains rising in the distance against a sky painted in shades of orange and purple. "It's breathtaking," Cassidy said softly, the beauty of the landscape momentarily distracting her from her conflicted feelings. "Worth the climb?" Kieran asked, a tentative smile touching his lips. "Yes," she admitted, returning his smile despite herself. "Kieran, I'm not angry." Surprised, yes, and perhaps a little unsettled. "But not angry. How could I be when your interference saved me from Harker's auction block?" Relief washed over his features. "I've never been one to meddle in others' affairs," he said, "but something about your situation. I couldn't walk away." He gazed out at the vista, his profile strong against the darkening sky. "Maybe it was because I've spent too much of my life doing just that, walking away when things got complicated." Cassidy studied him, seeing the weight of regret in the set of his shoulders. "What happened?" she asked gently. "What are you trying to make right?" Kieran was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, tinged with old pain. "During the war, my unit was stationed near a small town in Virginia. There was a family, their father, mother, 2 daughters. The father had Union sympathies, which made them targets." He drew a deep breath. "One night, a group of Confederate guerrillas raided the farm. We heard the shots from our camp, but our captain ordered us to stay put, said it wasn't our fight, that we had to protect our position." Cassidy's heart ached, already anticipating the conclusion. By the time we got there the next morning, it was too late, the whole family gone. His hands clenched at his sides. "I followed orders. I stayed in camp while people who needed help died. After that, I promised myself I'd never again stand by when I could act." Impulsively, Cassidy reached out, touching his arm. "That wasn't your fault," she said. "You were a soldier. You had to obey orders." "Maybe," he conceded. "But it taught me something important. Sometimes doing what's right means breaking the rules." He looked down at her hand on his arm, then back to her face. "When I heard about you, about what Harker planned, I couldn't just ride on. Not again." In that moment, standing in the fading light with the truth laid bare between them, Cassidy felt something fundamental shift in her perception of Kieran Blackwood. What had begun as gratitude toward a heroic stranger deepened into something more complex: admiration for a man trying to atone for past regrets, respect for his unflinching honesty, and something else, something warmer that made her pulse quicken when he looked at her. "Thank you," she said simply, "for telling me the truth, and for helping me, whatever your reasons." He nodded, a smile slowly warming his features. "We should head back," he said, offering his arm. "Sarah will send out a search party if we're gone too long." As they walked back toward the welcoming lights of the ranch house, Cassidy found herself wondering what the coming days would bring. The journey to California was still long and fraught with danger, but for the first time, she allowed herself to think beyond mere survival to the possibility of something more. The next few days at Blackwood Ranch passed in a pleasant rhythm that gave Cassidy a taste of what a settled life in the West might be like. She helped Sarah with household tasks, learning the practical skills needed to maintain a home far from the conveniences of city life. In the evenings, the four of them would gather in the main room, talking and sometimes singing to Connor's competent guitar playing. Kieran, meanwhile, spent his days with his brother, repairing fences, checking cattle, and generally making himself useful around the ranch. Cassidy often caught glimpses of him working shirtless in the sun, his tanned skin glistening with sweat as he drove fence posts or broke horses in the corral. These sightings invariably caused her to blush and quickly find some indoor task that required her immediate attention. On the fourth day, Sarah cornered her in the kitchen while they were preparing dinner. "So," the older woman began with a knowing smile, "how long have you been in love with my brother-in-law?" Cassidy nearly dropped the bowl she was holding. I'm not. We barely know each other." Sarah laughed, a warm, genuine sound. "Oh, honey, I've seen the way you look at him when you think no one's watching, and more tellingly, I've seen how he looks at you." "How does he look at me?" Cassidy asked before she could stop herself. "Like a man who's found something he thought was lost forever," Sarah replied, her tone softening. "I've known Kieran for 8 years, and I've never seen him this way, not even close." Cassidy busied herself with kneading dough, hoping the activity would hide her flushed cheeks. "He's risked everything to help me. Of course I'm grateful. It's not gratitude I'm seeing," Sarah interrupted gently. "And you know it." Unable to deny the truth of this, Cassidy sighed. "Even if there were feelings, it doesn't change our situation. Harker is still hunting me. Kieran has his own troubles with this Victor Dalton, and I'm still bound for California." "Plans change," Sarah pointed out. "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. Connor and I met when he was passing through my hometown in Missouri, headed for the goldfields in California. He never made it past my father's general store." Her eyes twinkled with the memory. "Sometimes you find your destination isn't a place at all, but a person." The conversation gave Cassidy much to ponder as she worked alongside Sarah, Was she falling in love with Kieran? The possibility both thrilled and terrified her. After the disaster with Hollister, she had sworn never to let a man determine her fate again. Yet Kieran was nothing like the controlling older men she had known in Boston. From the moment they met, he had respected her agency, consulted her on decisions, treated her as an equal partner in their escape. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Kieran broached the subject they had both been avoiding. "We should talk about the next leg of our journey," he said, his voice low to avoid being overheard by Connor and Sarah, who were inside preparing coffee. "We've been here 5 days. It's not safe to stay much longer." Cassidy nodded, feeling a pang at the thought of leaving this peaceful interlude behind. "When do you think we should leave?" "Tomorrow, if you're rested enough." He studied her face in the fading light. "Connor's agreed to lend us fresh horses and supplies. We'll head west toward the Arizona territory, avoiding the main trails." "And after that?" Cassidy asked. "All the way to California." Kieran seemed to hesitate. "That's the plan," he said finally. "Unless you've had second thoughts." Their eyes met, and in his, Cassidy saw the question he wasn't asking directly. Did she still want to go to California? Or was she considering other possibilities? Before she could formulate a response, the door opened, and Connor emerged with a tray of coffee cups. "Beautiful evening," he observed, handing them each a steaming mug. "Shame you'll be leaving it behind tomorrow." The moment broken, Kieran accepted his coffee with a nod of thanks. "We've imposed on your hospitality long enough. Besides, the longer we stay, the more risk we bring to your doorstep." Connor's expression grew serious. "Your family, Kieran. Your troubles are our troubles." "Not this time," Kieran insisted. "Victor Dalton isn't someone I want anywhere near you or Sarah and Harker." He glanced at Cassidy. "Let's just say I'd prefer to face him on ground of our choosing, not here where others could be caught in the crossfire." The remainder of the evening was spent finalizing preparations for their departure. Maps were consulted, routes discussed, contingencies planned. Connor provided detailed information about water sources and settlements along their proposed path, while Sarah packed food that would last through the first week of travel. After the others had retired for the night, Cassidy found herself unable to sleep. She slipped downstairs, thinking to get a glass of water, and was surprised to find Kieran still awake, sitting at the kitchen table cleaning his revolver by lamplight. He looked up as she entered, his hand stilling on the weapon. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked softly. She shook her head, taking a seat across from him. "Too many thoughts. About tomorrow, about everything." She watched as he reassembled the revolver with practiced ease. "Kieran, what happens when we reach California? After you've fulfilled your self-appointed mission to deliver me safely to San Francisco?" His hands paused momentarily before continuing their work. "I suppose I head back east, maybe stop here for a while, help Connor with the ranch." He looked up, meeting her eyes. "Unless you'd rather I stayed in California." The question hung between them, laden with unspoken meaning. Cassidy took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "What if I didn't go to California at all?" she asked quietly. Kieran set down the revolver, his full attention now on her face. "What are you saying, Cassidy?" "I'm saying that maybe Sarah was right. Maybe sometimes your destination isn't a place but a person." Her heart was pounding so hard she was certain he must hear it. "These past days, being here with you with your family, it's made me question what I really want." Kieran reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "And what do you want?" "A home," she said simply. "Not just a place to hide, but somewhere I belong, people I belong with." She turned her hand beneath his, their fingers intertwining. "Someone I belong with." The intensity in his blue eyes nearly took her breath away. "Are you saying what I think you're saying?" I think I'm falling in love with you, Cassidy admitted, the words rushing out before she could lose her nerve. I know it's fast and probably foolish given our circumstances, but she didn't get to finish. Kieran was on his feet, pulling her up and into his arms in one fluid motion. His lips found hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened, communicating months of longing compressed into days of proximity. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since I first saw you in that saloon, he confessed. Why didn't you? Cassidy asked, her hand still resting on his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her palms. Because you deserved better than a man kissing you out of nowhere when you were still running for your life, he replied with a small smile. And because I was afraid. Afraid? You? The notion seemed absurd given everything she had seen him do. Afraid that once you were safe, once you didn't need me anymore, you'd realize I was just a rough cowboy with nothing to offer a woman like you. His eyes searched hers. I've lived a hard life, Cassidy. Done things I'm not proud of. You deserve someone better. I deserve someone who sees me as a person, not property, she countered. Someone who respects my choices and stands beside me, not in front of me. Someone brave enough to risk everything for a stranger because it was the right thing to do. She touched his face gently. I think that someone is you. He turned his head to press a kiss into her palm. If you're sure, he said, his voice rough with emotion, then I think we need to revise our plans. California can wait. First, we need to deal with Harker and with Dalton. Make sure we can build a life without always looking over our shoulders. Cassidy nodded, knowing he was right. Their path forward wouldn't be easy, but nothing worthwhile ever was. Together, she said firmly. Whatever comes, we face it together. Together, he agreed, sealing the promise with another kiss. The morning dawned clear and cool, perfect weather for travel. Connor and Sarah saw them off with hugs, provisions, and promises to write. As they rode away from the ranch, Cassidy felt a curious mixture of sadness and anticipation. They were leaving safety behind, but riding toward a future that suddenly seemed full of possibilities. Kieran led them west, following game trails and dry creek beds that kept them off the main routes where Harker might be watching. By midday, they had covered significant ground, the terrain gradually changing from grassy plains to more rugged country with rocky outcroppings and scattered juniper. There's a trading post about 2 hours ahead, Kieran informed her as they stopped to rest the horses. Run by a Navajo man named Thomas Begay. He's a friend and, more importantly, he hears all the news that passes through this part of the territory. You think he might have information about Harker? Cassidy asked, taking a sip from her canteen. Or Dalton, Kieran confirmed. Either way, it's worth checking. They reached the trading post in the late afternoon, a sturdy adobe building with a corral and several outbuildings nestled in a small valley. As they approached, a tall man with graying hair tied back in a traditional Navajo style emerged from the main building, raising a hand in greeting. Kieran Blackwood, he called. It has been many moons since you passed this way. Kieran dismounted, clasping the man's hand warmly. Too many, Thomas. How's business? The same. Some days good, some days quiet. Thomas's dark eyes moved to Cassidy with interest. And who is your companion? Cassidy Montgomery, Kieran introduced her, helping her down from her horse. My. He hesitated, looking to Cassidy for guidance on how to describe their relationship. His partner, Cassidy supplied with a smile, taking Kieran's hand. Thomas's weathered face crinkled in a knowing smile. It is good to see you have finally found someone to tame your wandering spirit, my friend. He gestured toward the building. Come inside. You will take food and rest with us tonight. The interior of the trading post was a fascinating mix of cultures. Navajo blankets and pottery displayed alongside practical goods for settlers and travelers. A woman who Thomas introduced as his wife, Mary, welcomed them warmly and immediately set about preparing a meal. As they ate, Thomas shared news of the region, most of it mundane until he mentioned a group of riders who had passed through 3 days earlier. 3 men, he said, watching Kieran's reaction carefully. One older with a scar across his chin. The others younger, rough types. They asked many questions about travelers heading west. Kieran and Cassidy exchanged a glance. Did they mention names? Kieran asked. Thomas nodded slowly. The older one asked specifically if I had seen a young woman with red hair, traveling alone or with a tall man. He offered money for information. Harker, Cassidy whispered, her appetite suddenly gone. What did you tell them? Kieran asked, his posture tense. Thomas looked offended at the question. I told them I see many travelers but remember few faces. That satisfied the younger men, but the one with the scar, he did not believe me. He leaned forward. He said they would return in 1 week and that my memory might improve by then. Kieran's expression hardened. I'm sorry to have brought this trouble to you, my friend. Thomas waved away his concern. Trouble finds all men eventually. It is how we face it that matters. He studied the couple across the table. These men who hunt you, they will not stop easily. No, Kieran agreed grimly. They won't. As the evening progressed, a plan began to take shape. If Harker was expected to return to the trading post in a few days, perhaps they could use that knowledge to their advantage. Instead of continuing to flee, they could prepare an ambush of their own. It's risky, Kieran acknowledged as they discussed the idea in the small guest room Thomas had provided. But if it works, we end this here. No more running. Cassidy considered the proposal carefully. What about Victor Dalton? Even if we deal with Harker, Dalton will still be hunting you. One problem at a time, Kieran said, though she could tell he had considered this as well. Besides, Dalton is looking for me alone, not us together. Once Harker is out of the picture, we have more options. They spent the next day preparing. Thomas's trading post sat in a defensible position, with good sight lines in all directions. With the traders' permission, they set up vantage points and escape routes, discussing various scenarios and how to respond to each. The key is to separate Harker from his men, Kieran explained as they surveyed the area from a ridge overlooking the trading post. He's the dangerous one, the one with the personal stake in capturing you. The others are just hired guns. If Harker goes down, they'll likely cut their losses. Cassidy nodded, though the thought of the coming confrontation filled her with dread. And if things go wrong, Kieran pointed to a narrow canyon to the west. That leads to a series of caves Thomas showed me. If we get separated, head there and wait. I'll find you. On the 3rd day of their wait, Thomas's son rode in from a nearby settlement with news that raised the stakes even higher. There is talk of another group of riders asking questions about a man matching Kieran's description, he reported. Led by a man named Dalton. Kieran's face went grim. How far? 2 days' ride to the east. They moved slowly, asking at every settlement. This development complicated matters significantly. If both Harker and Dalton were converging on the area, their carefully laid plans might not be sufficient. We should leave, Cassidy urged that night as they sat by the fire in their room. Find somewhere else to make our stand. Kieran shook his head. Running won't solve this. Sooner or later we'd have to face them both. At least here we have Thomas and his family to help, and we know the terrain. He took her hands in his. I won't let anything happen to you, Cassidy, I promise. She squeezed his hands, drawing strength from his certainty. It's not me I'm worried about. If anything happened to you because of me, nothing will happen, he assured her. By this time next week, we'll be free to go wherever we choose, together." The confidence in his voice was almost enough to make her believe it. Almost. Dawn broke misty and cool on the day Harker was expected to return. Thomas had sent his wife and younger children to stay with relatives, leaving only himself, his eldest son, Kieran, and Cassidy at the trading post. They positioned themselves strategically, Thomas inside the main building, his son in the stable with a clear view of the approach, Kieran hidden among the rocks overlooking the yard, and Cassidy in the small storeroom with a shotgun and strict instructions to use it only if absolutely necessary. The morning passed with agonizing slowness, every sound making them tense for action. By noon, there was still no sign of Harker or his men, and Cassidy began to hope they had changed their plans. It was mid-afternoon when Thomas's son gave the signal, 3 riders approaching from the east. Cassidy's heart raced as she peered through a crack in the storeroom wall, watching as Harker and his men rode into the yard. They looked dusty and irritable, clearly frustrated by their lack of success in tracking their quarry. "Begay," Harker called as he dismounted. "Get out here." Thomas emerged from the trading post, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Harker, you have returned as promised, and I expect your memory has improved," Harker replied, his hand resting meaningfully on his holstered pistol. "Have you seen the girl, or the man traveling with her?" Thomas shook his head slowly. "As I told you before, many travelers pass through. I cannot recall every face." Harker's expression darkened. "I think you're lying, old man, and I don't have time for games." He drew his pistol, pointing it casually at Thomas. "Maybe this will help your memory." It was the moment they had been waiting for. From his position in the rocks, Kieran called out, "Drop the gun, Harker. It's over." Harker whirled, trying to locate the source of the voice. His men also drew their weapons, looking around nervously. "Blackwood," Harker growled. "I should have known you'd be stupid enough to stop running." "I'm done running," Kieran replied, still hidden from view. "And so is Miss Montgomery. You're going to leave here without her, or you're not leaving at all." Harker laughed, an ugly sound. "Big talk from a man hiding in the rocks. Why don't you come down and face me like a man, so you can shoot me?" "I don't think so." Kieran's voice was calm, controlled. "Here's what's going to happen. You and your men are going to drop your weapons, get on your horses, and ride away. You'll forget about Cassidy Montgomery and the $500 Hollister promised you." "Or what?" Harker challenged. "Or I put a bullet through your skull right now," Kieran replied matter-of-factly. "Your choice." There was a tense silence as Harker considered his options. Cassidy could see the calculation in his eyes, weighing the bounty against his life. Finally, he seemed to reach a decision. "All right, Blackwood, you win this round." He lowered his pistol slightly. "But this isn't over. Hollister wants his property back, and I don't like leaving jobs unfinished." "She's not property," Kieran said, his voice hardening. "She's a free woman who made her choice, and that choice wasn't Hollister." Harker's mouth twisted in a sneer. How touching! The cowboy and the runaway bride. He took a step back, gesturing to his men to mount up. "Enjoy your victory while it lasts. There are other bounty hunters, other men who won't let a woman's defiance go unpunished." Cassidy's blood ran cold at the implicit threat. As long as Hollister's money was on the table, there would always be men like Harker hunting her. As if reading her thoughts, Kieran called out, "Tell Hollister to withdraw the bounty. Tell him Cassidy Montgomery is under my protection now, and the next man who comes looking for her won't get the chance to walk away." Harker laughed again as he mounted his horse. "I'll be sure to pass along the message, though I doubt it will have the effect you're hoping for." With that, he wheeled his horse around, his men following suit. They rode out of the trading post yard at a canter, not looking back. Only when they were well out of sight did Kieran emerge from his hiding place, rifle in hand. He quickly crossed to where Thomas stood, clapping the older man on the shoulder. "Thank you, my friend. You played your part perfectly." Thomas nodded, though his expression remained troubled. "He will return, Kieran. Men like that do not surrender so easily." "I know," Kieran agreed, "but we've bought some time." Cassidy emerged from the storeroom, the shotgun still clutched in her trembling hands. Kieran crossed to her immediately, gently taking the weapon and setting it aside before pulling her into a tight embrace. "You did well," he murmured against her hair. "It's over for now." She clung to him, the adrenaline of the confrontation leaving her shaky. Will he really go back to Hollister? Or will he just wait until we leave here and try again? Hard to say, Kieran admitted. But either way, we're better prepared now, and we know he's out there, which gives us an advantage. Thomas's son called from his lookout position, his voice urgent. "Riders coming from the north." "At least 5, moving fast." Kieran's body tensed. "Dalton," he said grimly. "Sooner than I expected." The relative victory over Harker was immediately overshadowed by this new threat. 5 riders meant Dalton had reinforced his numbers since Thomas's son had last heard news of him. "Inside," Kieran ordered, guiding Cassidy toward the main building. "We need better cover than what we had for Harker." They barely made it to the trading post door when the riders appeared on the ridge above, silhouetted against the sky. Unlike Harker's cautious approach, these men rode straight down into the yard, spreading out to cover all possible exits. The leader, a man with a striking resemblance to the outlaw Kieran had killed, dismounted with fluid grace. "Blackwood," he called. "I know you're in there. Come out and face me." Kieran positioned Cassidy behind the thick adobe wall, then moved to a window where he could see Dalton without exposing himself to fire. "I'm here, Victor," he called. "Though I'm surprised it took you this long to find me." Dalton's laugh held no humor. "Oh, I found you weeks ago. Been following you since Denver, just waiting for the right moment to settle our score." His eyes narrowed as he scanned the building. "Where's the girl, the one Harker was after?" This question sent a chill through Cassidy. If Dalton had been following them since Denver, he knew everything: their escape from Cedar Creek, their stay at the Blackwood Ranch, their plan to ambush Harker. "She's not part of this," Kieran replied, his voice hard. "Your quarrel is with me, not her." "True enough," Dalton conceded. "But she's become a complication, hasn't she? Something you care about." He smiled coldly. "My brother cared about things too before you put 3 bullets in him." "Your brother was a murderer," Kieran shot back. "He killed 3 innocent men for their money, then tried to kill me when I went after him." "Details," Dalton said dismissively. "What matters is family. He was my blood and you spilled it." His voice hardened. "Now I'm going to spill yours. And maybe the girls too, just so you know what it feels like to watch someone you love die." The threat against Cassidy pushed Kieran to a decision. "Give me 5 minutes to send the others out," he called. "Then you and I can settle this man to man. No need for anyone else to get hurt." Dalton considered this, then nodded. 5 minutes. Anyone still inside after that becomes a target. Kieran turned to Thomas, his expression grim. "Get your son and go out the back. Head for the caves we discussed." The older man shook his head. "This is my home. I will not abandon it." "Thomas, please," Kieran urged. "This isn't your fight." "It became my fight when these men threatened my trading post," Thomas replied firmly. "We stand together." Seeing the determination in his friend's eyes, Kieran knew further argument was useless. He turned to Cassidy, taking her hands in his. "I need you to go with Thomas's son," he said quietly. "Get to the caves. If this goes badly—" "No," Cassidy interrupted, her green eyes flashing with resolve. "I'm not leaving you. We face this together, remember? Kieran's expression softened. Cassidy, if anything happened to you, and how do you think I would feel if something happened to you while I was hiding in a cave? She countered. We've come too far together to separate now. He studied her face, seeing the unwavering determination there, and finally nodded. All right. But you stay down and out of sight. Let me handle Dalton. The 5 minutes passed all too quickly. Outside, Dalton and his men had positioned themselves strategically around the trading post, effectively cutting off any escape. Time's up, Blackwood, Dalton called. Are you coming out, or do we have to come in and get you? Kieran checked his revolver one last time, then moved to the door. I'm coming out. Hold your fire. He stepped out onto the porch, hands slightly raised to show he wasn't immediately threatening. Dalton stood in the center of the yard, his own pistol holstered in a show of false civility. Just you and me, Victor, Kieran said, slowly lowering his hands. Send your men back and we'll settle this the old-fashioned way. Dalton smiled thinly. I don't think so. You see, unlike my brother, I don't believe in fair fights. I believe in winning. He gestured to his men. Search the building, find the girl. Before Kieran could react, 2 of Dalton's men moved toward the trading post. In the same instant, Thomas appeared in the doorway, shotgun in hand. This is my property, he declared. You are not welcome here. One of Dalton's men reached for his pistol. Thomas fired, the blast catching the man squarely in the chest and throwing him backward. Instantly, the yard erupted in gunfire. Kieran dove to the side, drawing his revolver as he rolled behind a water trough. From her position inside, Cassidy watched in horror as bullets splintered the doorframe where Thomas stood. The Navajo trader staggered, hit at least once, before disappearing back into the building. Outside, Kieran was exchanging fire with Dalton and his remaining men, each side seeking whatever cover they could find in the open yard. Cassidy crawled to where Thomas had fallen, finding him conscious but bleeding heavily from a wound in his shoulder. Help me up, he gasped. I can still fight. Cassidy tore a strip from her petticoat, quickly fashioning a bandage to stem the bleeding. Stay down, she urged. You've done enough. A crash from the back of the building told her that at least one of Dalton's men had circled around to enter from the rear. Thomas's son fired twice, and there was a cry of pain, followed by silence. The gunfight outside continued, the sharp reports of revolvers punctuated by the occasional boom of a rifle. Cassidy risked a glance through the window and saw Kieran pinned down behind the water trough, which was rapidly losing integrity as bullets tore through the wooden slats. Making a split-second decision, she grabbed the shotgun Thomas had dropped and moved to another window. Taking careful aim at one of Dalton's men who was working his way toward Kieran's position, she pulled the trigger. The recoil nearly knocked her down, but the shot found its mark. The man fell, clutching his leg and screaming in pain. The unexpected attack from a new direction momentarily confused the others, giving Kieran the opening he needed. He broke cover, firing twice as he ran toward a more substantial stone wall. Both shots found their target. Another of Dalton's men dropped, leaving only Victor himself and one remaining gunman. Cassidy, get down, Kieran yelled, having spotted her at the window. She ducked just as bullets shattered the glass above her head, sending shards raining down. When she dared to look again, she saw Dalton and his last man retreating toward their horses, using them as shields. Kieran was moving too, circling to cut off their escape. He and Dalton fired simultaneously. Kieran staggered but kept his feet, while Dalton spun with the impact of a bullet and fell to one knee. The last gunman, seeing his employer hit, apparently decided the odds were no longer in his favor. He leapt onto his horse and galloped away, leaving Dalton alone, wounded but still dangerous. Victor Dalton struggled to his feet, his pistol aimed unsteadily at Kieran. "Finish it," he snarled. "Like you did with my brother." Kieran advanced slowly, his own weapon trained on Dalton's chest. "Drop the gun, Victor. It's over." For a moment, it seemed Dalton might comply. Then, with startling speed, he swung his aim toward the trading post toward the window where Cassidy stood watching. Kieran fired without hesitation. The bullet struck Dalton in the center of his chest, the impact lifting him off his feet before he crumpled to the ground, his unfired pistol falling from limp fingers. The sudden silence that followed was deafening. Cassidy rushed outside to where Kieran stood over Dalton's body, his expression unreadable. As she reached him, she saw the dark stain spreading across his left side. "You're hit," she gasped, reaching for him. Kieran winced as her hand touched his ribs. "It's not bad. Bullet grazed me." He looked past her to the trading post. "How's Thomas?" "Shoulder wound. His son is tending to him." She helped Kieran to a bench outside the building, her hands shaking as she unbuttoned his shirt to examine the wound. As she had feared, it was more than a graze. The bullet had carved a deep furrow along his ribs, narrowly missing his lung. Using water from the damaged trough, she cleaned the wound as best she could, then bound it tightly with more strips torn from her petticoat. "That should hold until we can get you proper attention," she said, tying off the bandage. Kieran caught her hand, his eyes finding hers. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "That shot you took, it gave me the chance I needed." "We saved each other," she corrected, squeezing his hand. "Just like we promised." In the aftermath of the gunfight, there was much to be done. Thomas's wound, while painful, proved less serious than initially feared. His son rode to the nearest settlement to summon a doctor for both his father and Kieran, while Cassidy and Thomas's wife, who had returned upon hearing the gunshots from her nearby refuge, prepared the bodies for burial. By nightfall, the doctor had come and gone, leaving behind stitches, bandages, and stern instructions for rest. Kieran, predictably, was a poor patient, insisting on being up and about despite the pain that caused the color to drain from his face with each movement. "You need to rest," Cassidy scolded as she found him checking the perimeter of the trading post for the third time that evening. The doctor said, "I know what he said," Kieran interrupted, though there was no heat in his tone. "But I'll rest easier knowing we're secure." She slipped her arm around his waist, careful to avoid his injured side. "Harker is gone. Dalton is dead. For the first time since we met, no one is hunting us." Kieran stopped walking, turning to face her in the starlight. "You're right," he acknowledged, a note of wonder in his voice. "It's over. We're free." "Free to go wherever we choose," Cassidy reminded him, echoing his words from days earlier. "Together." He smiled, drawing her closer. "And where would you choose to go, Cassidy Montgomery?" She pretended to consider the question seriously. "Well, San Francisco has its appeal. But then again, so does New Mexico." Her eyes met his, full of promise. "I've heard the Blackwood Ranch is quite beautiful." Kieran's smile widened. "It is, and Connor could use the help. He's talking about expanding, breeding horses as well as cattle." "And would there be a place there for a Boston society girl with limited practical skills but a willingness to learn?" she asked, her tone light though the question was sincere. "I think we could find a suitable position," he replied, playing along. "Though I should warn you, the pay is terrible, the hours are long, and the boss can be quite demanding." "The boss being you," she teased. "God, no," Kieran laughed. "The boss is definitely Connor, or more accurately Sarah." His expression grew more serious as he gazed down at her. "But there might be another position available if you're interested." "Oh," Cassidy's heart quickened at his tone. What position would that be? Instead of answering immediately, Kieran reached into his pocket and withdrew something small that glinted in the moonlight. "This was my mother's," he said, opening his palm to reveal a simple gold ring with a small pearl. "She gave it to me before she died, said I should save it for the right woman." Cassidy's breath caught as he took her hand, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know it's fast," he continued. "We've known each other less than 2 weeks. But in that time, you've shown more courage, more determination, and more heart than most people do in a lifetime." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "I can't offer you the life you had in Boston. I'm not a wealthy man, and ranching is hard work with little glamour. But I can promise you this. You'll never be treated as property, never be forced to do anything against your will, and never have to face any challenge alone." Tears welled in Cassidy's eyes as she realized what was happening. "Kieran." "Cassidy Montgomery," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? Not because someone arranged it or because society expects it, but because you choose it, freely and completely." The contrast between this proposal and Hollister's cold, businesslike arrangement couldn't have been starker. Where that had felt like a prison sentence, this felt like the opening of a door to endless possibilities. "Yes," she whispered, her voice catching. Then, more firmly, "Yes, I will marry you, Kieran Blackwood." His face broke into a smile of such unrestrained joy that it took her breath away. He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as if made for her, then pulled her into a kiss that spoke of all the adventures yet to come. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, he rested his forehead against hers. "I promise you won't regret this," he murmured. "I know," she replied simply, "because we'll face whatever comes together." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the Blackwood Ranch, with Connor officiating thanks to his position as a local justice of the peace, and Sarah serving as Cassidy's attendant. Thomas and his family made the journey to witness the union, his arm still in a sling but his spirit undimmed by his recent ordeal. As Cassidy spoke her vows beneath the spreading branches of a cottonwood tree, wearing a dress Sarah had altered from her own wedding gown, she marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had fled Boston in terror, certain that her only option was to run as far as possible from everything she had known. Never could she have imagined finding not just safety, but love and family in the wild territory she had seen merely as an escape route. The celebration afterward was joyous, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed the entire county. Neighboring ranchers came to welcome the new Mrs. Blackwood, bringing gifts both practical and precious. By the time the last guest had departed, the moon was high in the sky, bathing the ranch in silver light. "Happy?" Kieran asked as they stood on the porch of the small cabin Connor had built for them near the main house. Cassidy leaned into his embrace, looking out at the land that was now her home. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly, "though I still can't quite believe how we got here." Kieran chuckled, his arms tightening around her. "From an auction block to a wedding altar in less than a month, it's not the conventional path to matrimony." "Nothing about us has ever been conventional," she pointed out, turning in his arms to face him, "and I wouldn't have it any other way." As they stood there in the moonlight, the past receding and the future stretching bright before them, Cassidy thought of all the twists of fate that had brought them together. Harker's pursuit, which had seemed like the end of her freedom, had instead led her to the man who valued that freedom above all else. The bounty hunter who had tried to auction her, as if she were nothing, had inadvertently delivered her to the man who had looked at her and declared, "You're everything to me." Life in the West would never be easy. There would be hard work, harsh winters, and the constant challenges of building something lasting in a land that forgave few mistakes. But as Kieran led her into their new home, into their new life together, Cassidy knew with absolute certainty that she had found where she belonged. Not in a place, but in a person. Not in escape, but in standing her ground. Not in running from the past, but in building a future, hand in hand with the man who had seen her true worth when others had tried to put a price on her. And that, she decided as Kieran's lips found hers in the privacy of their new home, was a future worth fighting for.